a lot of what I knew about my home country was through the storytelling that I'd heard from my parents. And that is really what laid the foundation down for me as far as my love for storytelling and my love for bringing experiences to life through words.
Welcome back to Meet Bridget, a show that sheds light on the often untold teenage and young adult stories of successful women from all types of backgrounds and in all sorts of careers. This show is an extension of Bridget, a confidence coaching service for young women. I'm Asha Gabriel, and I co host this show alongside my best friend and Bridget COO, Kashia Rosenberg. Today, we have a special guest on, Charlie Cooper. Charlie Cooper is an on-air host, an entertainment reporter, and who has been in the journalism game for over a decade. She's worked in television, editorial, and social media throughout her career, including a recent stint serving as a main host and producer of Rolling Stone magazine's daily show on Twitch. She currently reports for The Broadway Show, a New York City based, nationally syndicated weekly TV show that airs in over 170 markets across the country. Some other notable career stops Charlie has made along the way include CBS New York, Essence Magazine, and BET Networks. She loves covering live events, including major music festivals like Coachella, Lollapalooza, and South by Southwest. She also partners with brands as a full-time content creator and is a host of Airbnb short-term rentals. She's found a passion in creating unique accommodations across the country for creatives to stay, relax, and be inspired. When Charlie isn't juggling a million and one things career-wise, you can find her cooking a semi-healthy meal or trying new restaurants, traveling to exciting destinations, indulging in new experiences, and sharing it all on her social media to encourage others to experience life more boldly. She believes a big part of her purpose is to serve, take calculated risks that inspire others, and to do the things that bring her and those around her joy. So, Charlie, I don't know where to start. You have so much on your plate, and I'm so excited to dive into it with you here today. But thank you for joining us and just bringing your story to our table.
Excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Well, as you might know, we love to dive right into the childhood, youth experiences, formative experiences that really inform the person you are today. So if you could just take us back to where you grew up, we'd love it.
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, but before that even happened, my family is originally from West Africa. So we're from Monrovia, Liberia. And we came here because of the Civil War. And so much of my upbringing did happen in Rhode Island, but I grew up in a household that is very proudly African. And so it's funny, my mom used to always say, when you walk in my house, you walk into Africa. So she didn't play. Like we ate African food, we all of the things. My childhood was very much immersive in that experience, and I really appreciate my parents for just staying true to that background because it's definitely something that has defined so many parts of me. And I feel like even to this day, there are moments where I'm like, huh, I feel like I'm interested in that thing because of my upbringing. One of those things being journalism, for example. Obviously, because I came here at such a young age. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I came here when I was a child, so I was about 2 months old. My siblings, I have 5 siblings. My
Wow.
siblings were a little older, 5, 6, 7, and then, like, 12, 13. So they were much older when they came, but, I was a baby, and so a lot of what I knew about my home country was through the storytelling that I'd heard from my parents and from siblings and from family members. And I think that that is really what laid the foundation down for me as far as my love for storytelling and my love for bringing experiences to life through words.
I love that. And I mean, I love just picturing the fullness of your family experience from such a young age to have so many siblings and to really have a cultural experience that it was so authentic that they
Mhm.
brought here to the US, I think is a gift for a child in that kind of family and also for the people that you, I'm sure, have interacted with along the way, just bringing that cultural richness to every setting that you came across. I love hearing about big families and the
Mhm.
sibling dynamics, how everyone was different or similar. What were your interactions like with your siblings at home?
Yeah, so my parents were really big on preaching the importance of family, and so we were very, very close. So much so that like my mom calls my sister like small mom or like
Mhm.
small pa, you know, so some of my brothers because like they helped raise us. And to this day, it's funny because I ran into someone recently, and I was with my brother, and he kind of joked like, "I'm gonna be watching him to see if he takes good care of you." And my brother was like, "I've been taking care of her since I was like 5 years old." So it's funny because it was like truly, I mean, that's been the case. He's been a second father to me, and my sister, my oldest sister Zoe, has been like a second mom to me. My other siblings too have played very important roles as well, but those two for sure have just marked their stamp on my life as being like second parents. And it's been an incredible experience just being the baby of six. And people are like, "Were you spoiled?" I don't know that I was spoiled necessarily, because as the baby, there would be moments where I remember my siblings getting away with a lot of stuff that I didn't necessarily get away with get away with. But it was nice to kind of have some sort of like groundwork laid for me. For example, with college, I had my siblings who I was able to kind of watch go through that process. And obviously, I was able to go through my own process and make my own mistakes, but it's always nice to have somebody who came before you who you can ask questions to and kind of help guide you through the process. So, yeah, we were really close. We still are incredibly close.
That is so cool. Now, so you said you were a baby when you came over. Obviously, your siblings with those age differences, some of them were older when your family moved here. What do you know about, just your parents and your older siblings, their experience of moving here to a new country and kind of setting up shop?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know everything about it because of that storytelling, but then also because I lived a lot of it. It's really interesting because for the first time ever, I visited Liberia probably a year ago almost a year
Wow.
ago with my mom and my dad, and it was my mom's first time going back. It was a trip that was, like, really enlightening. It was one of those things where it's really funny, people talk about manifestation, and I remember for a long time, I would always say, "I'm not going back to Liberia until my mom is ready," and I never knew why that was in my spirit to say that, but whenever people would ask me if I've been to Liberia, that was always my answer, and so it was just kind of ironic how it all happened because the plan was never for me to really go with them, but then I just happened to go with them, and now looking back retrospectively at the entire trip, I'm like, I was meant to be there because a lot of heavy things, happened because, I mean, if you think about it, these are 2 people who my dad had been there since the Civil War, but my mom hadn't, so it's been over 30 years since she's been there. She remembers leaving a country prior to the war where they were doing so well and they were just so prominent in the community, and they remember just a country that was flourishing and all of the things, and then after that, it was the war, and so I think that's why it took her so long to wanna go back because she didn't know what she was going back to. It was a really rewarding trip, and that kind of helped make a lot of the stories that I've heard over the course of time make more sense. It gave a lot more context to kind of be in that space and to see what they were referring to all of these years, but also make some new memories with them. But I know coming to a new country, it's never easy, especially when you're running from war. You're going to a country that you were never familiar with. My parents traveled a lot when they were in Liberia, but they had never come to the States. So it was literally starting your life from nothing,
Yeah.
essentially, and, I think even that has played a big role in my love for service and for people because I've seen how other people have served my family, especially, moving to Rhode Island. We didn't know anybody, we didn't have very much, and it was a struggle for a very, very long time, and so for me, I always have a heart for giving back because I know that had it not been for complete strangers giving to my family and helping us during difficult years, I don't know where we would be, so
It's so cool hearing that, you had that experience of going back with your parents alongside them. I can totally relate to you. So my mom's a first generation immigrant from India and she left when she was 21 and I remember kind of
wow.
having that same narrative in my head where it's like people would ask like, "Oh, your mom's from India. Have you been?" And in my head, once I was even old enough to understand that question, it was like, "Oh, well, my mom wants to go when we're all like old enough to understand it." 'Cause that's
Yes,
kinda what she would say to us, and we're like, "What's India?"
right.
When we were little kids, and that's what her answer was, and we finally had the chance to go back with her, and we walked to the place where her home was, like, the
Wow.
elementary school she went to, the milk stand her mom and sister worked at,
Yeah.
and it was so, so amazing. I wondered at times, I was like, "This is probably just such a full experience for her in so many ways. Like, obviously, the place has changed a lot
Mhm.
from what it was when she grew up there, but also I'm sure the experience of having yourself change so much in the time that you're away from a place and realizing like, wow, who I am, and my experience is disconnected from this place, but still so foundational here.
Totally, totally.
So, so cool. So when you were a kid, you had that storytelling element in your life from the very beginning. Were you outgoing from the get-go? Because you're clearly a very like engaged, outgoing person. Has this always been there for you?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. It's so funny because it's really interesting to hear people's perspectives of me. Like, I can always tell how comfortable I am with someone based on the way they describe me. Because some people
Hmm.
think I'm completely shy. Like, I remember
Yes.
one of my mom's like closest friends was like shocked a few years ago that I was outspoken, and she was just like, "I never knew this about you. I feel like I've known you forever, and like you've always been very shy." And I remember thinking, I don't ever remember being shy. But I think for
Yeah.
me, it takes a little while to, or not a little while, but I think if I'm comfortable with you quickly, you'll see that side of me. But if I'm like a little reserved, you'll see me being a little reserved. So it's pretty interesting. But I'd say I've been outgoing for sure for forever in my mind, at least. I've always been one of those people who like does what I want. I don't care what people say. Like it's funny. I commented on somebody's post the other day on Instagram because they had like this denim look that was like kind of crazy and people were going nuts in their comments being like, this looks horrible, like you should stick to just wearing like whatever. And I had to comment because I was like, honestly, this reminds me of myself as a child. I remember I used to wear my denim inside out on purpose to school because I just used to try a bunch of different like fashion
Yeah.
style things to school. And I remember I had this one teacher who would always like joke on me and be like, "Do you get dressed in the dark?" And I'd always like troll and be like, "Yeah, I do." And then
Yeah.
years later, it became a
Like I
fashion
want
trend.
to.
Exactly. But it's like years later in my adulthood, it became a fashion trend. And it's just like, how ironic. So I've always been that person who, like, if I want to wear something, I'm going to wear it. If I want to try something, I'm going to try it. If I want to take a risk, I'm going to take it and we'll just see what happens. So, and I think that having a bunch of outgoing siblings
Mm.
really just, built up my confidence. Also, my parents have always been the type of parents to, like, hype me up. They've always been like, "You're the best," even when I wasn't the best. They were like, "You're the best as long as you're giving whatever it is your best, you're the best," So I grew up with a lot of, I guess, just people feeding into me positive words, and also my mom and my dad encouraging us all to, like, just lift each other up all the time. And so that's just been a part of my life and my existence and what I try to do as an adult too. Like I feel like with my friends, I love on them so heavily. Like I don't have a problem telling them I love them. I don't have a problem like vocalizing how proud I am of them or whatever it might be. So
What careers were your parents in by now?
yeah. Yeah. So my mom worked for the Providence Public School Department doing a whole bunch of different things. And then my dad was a social worker. So yeah.
Were they in similar fields before you moved here, or did they kind of just, like, land and take off in those places?
Yeah, so they were in completely different fields in Liberia. So
Hmm,
in Liberia, my dad was he dealt with like money. I can't remember the fields, but he dealt with money. And
yeah,
then in Liberia, my mom worked for US Aid. And so that's how she was able to like travel a bunch and just be connected around the world. But that completely changed when they were displaced.
wow. So to
Finance,
literally pick
finance.
that
That's the
finance.
I
Yeah, there's the
I
word.
was like "What is the word?"
Money, it's the same thing. But, I mean, I'm loud because it's like to move I have 2 children, and it's like, you change the schedule, it's like, "Oh, her nap is 30 minutes later," and it's like, "Oh, like, how am I gonna change my whole day?" You know? So to
Right.
move with 6 kids to a
Yeah.
completely new country, really take on different, career paths, but still stay so, empowering and uplifting. It kind of sounds like your parents were basically running their own little village where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you guys, we're together and we got to lift each other up. And, we're all each other have at the end of the day. It's like, I love my parents said a similar thing to us growing up. Where it's like, well, your siblings are like, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have all these different things, competition, whatever. But it's like your siblings are a gift to you. They're a little
Totally.
community that you really can't find exactly that way in any other place. So,
Totally.
um, that is so cool. So your siblings now, what kind of different fields have they gone into? Are they all outgoing? I know you said, like, you had pretty outgoing siblings.
Yeah, yeah. So I feel like they're all outgoing, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I just think about like Thanksgiving, we're all loud and like singing and dancing and
Yeah.
acting silly, and it's a time, but they all do different things. I have two siblings who are both attorneys. I have another sibling who is a social worker. I have It's so funny because I'm thinking about it because there are so many of them. So I'm like, I don't want to miss
I
anybody.
I know, I'm like,
Um,
I'd have to, like, make flashcards. I'm like, "These are my siblings' names."
Right, exactly. I have another sibling who's in medical technology, and then one more sibling who is a gospel singer. So he tours around the world, doing gospel music. So
So
yeah,
cool. When
yeah.
you were in school, did you always have an idea of what you might want to do, or did that iterate a few times?
Yeah, I feel like it's really interesting because when I think about it today, and sometimes I joke about this. So when I was a kid, there was one point where, I mean, for a long time, to be completely honest, I wanted to be a detective because crime just really fascinates me. And the way that the human mind works in that scenario, in various scenarios rather, is really fascinating to me and solving those things. So for a long time, I wanted to be a detective, but I just didn't wanna have to be like a cop on the streets, and I learned that you had to do
Mhm.
that, I'm like, "Yeah, no, I'm good on that." And then at one point when I was really, really young, I wanted to be, I always say a rapper, I guess more like a poet or a writer, but
Sure.
it's funny because nowadays I'm like, I sometimes joke that I kind of get the opportunity to fuse both of those passions because I get to speak, I get to use my voice, I get to be in the entertainment space, maybe not as a rapper, but and then I also get that investigative portion and that storytelling portion kind of fused together when I'm interviewing people and learning more about them. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see how the little things that you have interest in as a kid turn into this like amalgamation in your adulthood. I will say though, in college, my dad really, I mean, immigrant family. So my dad really wanted me to be a doctor. And I went into college pre-med and was just like, I hate this. And I was always like one of those students who like on the honor roll, did well, top of my class.
Yeah.
Freshman year was a hot mess because he wanted me to be do pre-med and I'm like, okay, I'll try it out. But it just I hate science. I hate being in hospitals. It just did not make sense. But I'm like, let me try it out. Did terribly. And he was like, you know what? I'm gonna bargain with you. Do what you want in the next semester and let's see how things change. And I did, and completely night and day. So
It's so funny too, like, we try the things that, like, our parents want us to do, especially if they're supportive, loving parents.
mhm.
I had this, like, idea in my mind for a long time that I was gonna be a pediatrician because I was like, I always loved babies. My parents
Yeah.
were doctors. So I was like, maybe that's the kind of doctor I should be. And I just remember this was like 7th grade. We have these turning points, right? 7th
Mhm.
grade, they pulled out the fetal pigs for dissection. They put one on my table, and I had my first, I think it was a panic attack now.
Moment of
I didn't
truth.
have the word for it then, but I was like, I can't be in this room, much less, like, actually cutting up in this little cute little thing. I went
Right.
in the hallway and was, like, really, like, having a hard time, and the teacher was like, "You can just, like, do the written report or something." I'm like, "Okay, well, yeah, whatever, like, I'm gonna be fine." But in my mind, it was such a big deal because I was like, "This is my worldview is, like, changed." I'm like, "This means I can't
Yep.
be a doctor."
Yeah.
And it was felt so big at the time because I was like, "But this is what I thought, I was gonna be."
Right.
But it just changes, but then you kinda look back and little bits of and things like you were saying, like the poetry aspect or like rapping is like interesting to me for some reason, but like, you're not a rapper now, but I do
Right.
kind of feel like these little interests, like I was super into like poetry too. Like I'd write
Mhm.
like song lyrics and I was like, maybe I'll be like a lyric writer someday.
Yeah.
And I don't do that. But I also feel like when I've done public speaking and that kind of thing, I get into like a flow that's not like I'm rapping, but I do feel like the energy kind of hits and then it's like
Mhm.
I don't know, when I'm speaking, sometimes it does feel like I'm almost singing or performing, if that makes any sense. So it's
Right.
like little things that we like or don't like, do continue like every learning, whether it's a thing you like or something that you really don't like, it all kinda comes together into, you know, the tapestry of your career, however that looks. We love sharing little moments and things like that with our audience because we coach teen girls
Mhm.
in these areas, and I think that there can be so much pressure these days
Yes.
for it's like, "Okay, you're 8. What are you into? What are you gonna be?" And it's like,
Right.
you know, yeah, pay attention to the things that, like, get you going, that feel, like, exciting to you, but you don't have to make so many decisions right now apart from
Yeah. Exactly, like, just kinda be, and
yeah.
enjoy that being space, and also just I think nourishing your kids, in a way that, like, celebrates the things that they're just naturally into. I think my mom
Yes.
did a fantastic job at that. Like, I loved, like, dancing when I was a kid, and she'd put me in, like, little classes, and even that, like, I think all of that just has to do with just the entertainment space and my love for it, and
Mhm.
look at it now, you know? So
So cool. As you're going through school, what did, like, the transitions between, like, elementary to high school to college look like for you? And what was kinda on your mind in terms of, like, where you thought you were going at those times?
yeah, so I'd probably say from middle school to high school, there was a little bit of pressure because my siblings are overachievers. Let's just be honest. For example, my sister, the one who I kind of referenced as like my second mom, she went to like a really top performing high school, and it was the high school that everybody wanted me to go to as well, kind of following her footsteps. And my brothers went to the high school that was right next to it, and they were like star athletes, and so it was a lot to like hard acts to follow. I did thankfully end up getting into that high school that my sister went to, and it was a fantastic experience. And still a lot of pressure, though. I just actually told somebody this story the other day. Addie, actually, who was on your show,
Mhm.
she had asked me. She was like, "Do you want to run a 5K or I think it was a 5K?" And I was like, "Oh, girl, I'm not the one to run that much, and I'll tell you why." And I kind of explained to her how, my sister was like a track athlete in high school, and the track coach loved her, and everybody loved her. And when I got there, everyone was like, "Well, you're gonna do track too, right?" And I was like, "No, I'm not really into that." But I tried it my senior year, failed horribly at it, and it was another one of those lessons where it's like, I just need to do the things that I wanna do. Because when I do the things that I
Right.
wanna do, I excel at those things, but when I'm forcing it, it's very clear that it's a force.
Yeah.
Um, so had a little bit of pressure in high school because of those conditions, but loved my experience there. I feel like I grew and developed so much throughout my high school experience. And then going to college was I always knew that I wanted to leave Rhode Island because Rhode Island's small. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I feel like I have a new appreciation for Rhode Island now that I'm an adult and I can experience different things that maybe didn't interest me when I was in high school. But I knew that I wanted to leave. I knew I wanted bigger. I had always dreamed about living in New York. The first book I ever learned to read was called My City. I can't find it online anywhere though. I feel like every couple of years I look for it. It's called My City, and it's a book about New York and like different characters in New York and their lives in New York. And my sister, Zoe, the one that I keep referring to, taught me how to read my first book, which was My City. And I think once I read My City, in my mind, I was always like, I have to live in New York. Like
Yeah.
this is the life that I'm called to. And so I ended up going to school in upstate New York, getting my bachelor's, and then I moved to New York City because I had so many friends who were from the city, and I knew I wanted to move to New York City to do journalism. Moved here for a couple of years, decided to go back upstate to Syracuse and get my master's in journalism. And then things kind of turned because I was like, oh, of course I'm going to go back to New York and do this. But I realized something that I didn't know before, which was a lot of the times with journalism, you kind of have to work your way up as far as markets go, and New York is the number one market. So it's like, probably not jumping from not being there to being there as a on-air journalist at least, So that journey kind of took me to Virginia, which was my first market, Roanoke, Virginia, and then took me to Texas, and then I made my way back to New York. So living the dream,
Right.
literally.
Yeah, well, taking it where, it needed to take you. At any point along the way, starting to pursue journalism, did you have moments where you questioned what you were doing or you ran into, like, an obstacle that seemed insurmountable at the time?
Yeah, I mean, all the time, even now, but I feel like the most pivotal ones were, well, there were several. So I remember in grad school, I just had heard and had done a lot of research, and people were always like, "You have to start at market." I always joke, "Market a billion." People are always like, "You have to start at market 359 and work your way up." And I've always been the type of person to be like, "No, I'm not. I'm gonna just figure this out. Like, I'm gonna see if I can start a little higher." And thankfully, I was able to start in like a market 60 or 70, something like that, which is pretty
Mhm.
high for somebody who was brand new to the industry. And I'm super grateful for. I still don't know which professor recommended me for this job, but I got a call one day from the station I worked at in Roanoke, and the news director was like raving about this professor who had called him. And I'm like, I still don't know who it is, but I'm so grateful for whoever it is. Took that job. But even then, I was like apprehensive about it because I'm like, am I ready for that? Like, even though I feel like I want that job, but am I ready to jump into a mid-sized market as someone who was super new to this craft? At the time, and don't judge me, but at the time, I did not know how to drive. I literally learned how to drive on used cars, like used
I love
vehicles,
it.
which is crazy. But I was like, I'm gonna figure it out. I don't care. I'm gonna figure it out. I got my license in grad school. I was 25. Got my license in grad school. First vehicle I learned how to like truly drive on was a used vehicle. But I went to that market, did really well. I was supposed to be there for 2 years. I stayed for a little over a year and got an offer in San Antonio, Texas. So I'm like, okay, we're moving up. My parents were really nervous because they were like, "You don't know anybody in Texas. You've never lived in Texas." Like there was a lot of like nerves there. Being the baby of the family, my mom has always been like super overprotective, but
Yeah.
also has always encouraged me, but also been like, "No, but my baby," you know. But I was like, "We're gonna figure it out. We're gonna figure it out. We're gonna go and we're gonna figure it out." And that's exactly what I did. But I think every step in my career came with some sort of like nervousness or some sort of like, should I be doing this? Should I not? I remember even having mentors in Virginia who worked at my station who I looked up to and loved, but were like, oh, you're gonna move to Texas? Like, it's one of those places where like if you don't do well, they're gonna fire you and all of these things. And I'm like, well, we'll see. I always say my saying is like sink or swim, and I know I'm never gonna sink. Like that's it.
Yeah.
You just have to make up your mind that you're not gonna sink and that you're gonna figure it out. And so I moved to Texas, figured it out, was there for a little longer than my contract because I loved everybody I worked with. I had an amazing time there. It was just so far from family though. And again, I always had the goal to go to New York, but even that was incredibly risky. Like I left that station, which was a great job, loved the city, had so much success there, but was like, I know that New York is calling me back. I don't know how this is going to play out because I knew I wanted to go back into entertainment. Because the whole thing for me was I was working in entertainment when I got out of undergrad, but I think at that time I didn't value it as much. I remember saying when one of my best friends moved me out of my apartment right before grad school, I was like, I don't care what Beyonce's wearing at X, Y, and Z award show. But for me in that moment, I just felt like, at least from my experience, the entertainment space wasn't bringing the value that I wanted to see. And so I was like, I'm going to grad school so I can learn how to critically think, so I can learn how to tell stories on a deeper level, and so I can do like hard news. And I did that. But the hard news space is one of those places where I just feel like I always say, I feel like journalists deserve to have like therapy just intertwined in their
Totally.
benefits package because the things that you see,
Yeah.
the things you report on, all of that stuff is just it can be traumatic. It really can, and I think I was just kind of tired of the daily trauma or what felt like daily
Mhm.
trauma, and I felt like I could bring value to the entertainment space. I felt like I had learned a lot. I had gotten the experience that I left New York hoping to get, and so I was like, "I'm gonna return there," but I had a big struggle doing that because whenever I would send out my reel, a lot of like news directors and hiring managers in New York would be like, okay, I can see that you can tell hard news stories really well, but I don't know how that's going to translate in an entertainment space. Like, I can't see your personality, but it's like, it's hard to inject personality when you're talking about a homicide at 2 in the morning. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Right.
so that was a really big challenge for me. And at one point, I just said to myself, you know what? I have to sell my car because I knew that would be the thing that would just get me out of San Antonio. I was like,
Yeah.
I have to sell my car and I'm leaving. Like, I'm giving myself a deadline by April. You got to get out of here. So I sold my car, I think a couple of months prior to me leaving, or I think I left in July. Sold it a couple months prior to me leaving, and it was a struggle getting around San Antonio, and I'm like, "Yeah, that was the thing I needed to do. You gotta go." Like, that was the point.
Yeah.
So I left, moved to New York. Thankfully, at the time, my brother was living here, so I kinda crashed with him for a little while, and I had told myself, "I'm never doing local news again. I'm not interested." And then I get a call from CBS to New York, and I'm like, "Well, who says no to CBS in the biggest
Yeah.
market?" And, so I was like, I'll take it. So
Yeah.
I kind of fell
You got
back.
me.
I know I fell back into that space and realized like, no, you came here intentionally and with a purpose. You said you weren't interested in doing local news anymore. It's not bringing you the joy that you wanted to bring. And that's so important to me. Like the work that I do, not feeling like a burden. Because I think I do my best work when I am joyful about it.
Yeah.
And when I enjoy that work, and I am grateful for that experience. Obviously, I got a lot out of it. I was able to anchor there, which I would have never imagined. Was able to report there, all of that, the networking and all of the things. But I just was not happy, and so eventually. it's crazy because eventually I end up, like, applying for jobs, happen to get the Broadway job that I have now as a freelancer, and I wanna say, like, maybe a couple weeks later, the pandemic happens, and I get laid off. Me and hundreds of other people get laid off, from CBS, and I was like, "That was a blessing," because I was like, "This close to quitting anyways." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was a blessing. It's just really interesting how, like, life kinda directs you too. Like, when it's that time, like, life life be life, and sometimes
Right, and
it
well, if you're just
works.
kinda paying attention, right, to the
Yeah.
things so we talk a lot about we really believe that, like, the sixth sense is intuition, and
Yes.
I think it plays a big role in our paths. I kinda label them as, like, eek or, like, ick moments, like, taking
Mm,
into account, like, what is your system telling you? Like, you being like, "Oh, I like, it's an ease, like, I really wanna go to New York, but I'm scared for this, and this reason," or, like, "I don't know what it's gonna look like." It's an E
right.
moment. It's like, I'm excited, but nervous, but I'm being told that way, but there are
Totally.
barriers. An ick is like, ick, like, this doesn't feel good, and that's kind of a,
Right.
like, you're away from these things, but I feel like if you keep focusing on not just what's coming easily to you, but the things that are, like, making you a little, like, tingly, where it's like,
Yes.
I don't know what it's gonna look like. It could be a disaster, but, like,
I
it's
gotta
exciting,
see.
I
Yeah, I
gotta
gotta
see.
see.
And I think that, like, when you're open to those things and open to doing the hard work associated with those things,
Yes.
the doors open and close,
Mhm.
where they should all around you. I love the image of you just being like, "Well, if I sell my car," like, kinda almost creating a little bit more, like, resistance for yourself against the things that you're like, "I'm over." That's a closed chapter, you
Mhm.
know?
And it's a chapter that's, like, felt so comfortable that I could find myself back into it, so I have to do something that prevents me from finding myself back into it.
Yeah. Well, and almost it's like it's hard to completely change what you're doing, right? Like to completely be like, I'm done doing this, I'm gonna start doing that. But I've also found that we're like when you're trying to transition into something slightly different, sometimes it's just taking one first step towards a no of something. Like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm gonna like maybe cut off this one commitment that I've been doing in this space that I'm not really interested. I'm just gonna say no to that one thing. And then sometimes that helps you like open the door to like, okay, actually, like I said no to part of that thing. And actually maybe that whole thing is something I'm done
Mhm.
with, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it. Yep.
So we do a little fast 5, and then we'll do a little closer. But number 1, what is, like, your best or most memorable story journalism experience that comes to mind?
Ooh, that's tough. Most memorable. Wow, it's really interesting, and I feel bad saying this, but I feel like sometimes it all just, like, kind of just flows together, and I'm like, I know that there is a most memorable. Unfortunately, the most memorable that I'm thinking about is negative because it
Yeah.
was traumatic, so I don't necessarily wanna mention that. Oh, that's a tough one. Oh, I guess okay, probably most memorable now that I think about it, interview I'd say is,
Yeah.
getting to talk to Bill Nye, which is like,
So
childhood
cool.
hero, you know what I mean? Like, literally.
100%. He's like such a legend. It's like, is he even real? That is
Right.
very cool.
Yeah.
I know. I was actually thinking when you were talking before too, having gone from entertainment to local news and like hard news and going back to entertainment, do you think that having that contrast has informed your opinion on like the value of entertainment in society and why we seek it out and why it is actually like pretty essential to just what people are consuming?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I obviously naturally feel like people consume entertainment journalism because they just kind of want to free themselves of all the other things that are happening in the world that they're seeing on TV or hearing on the radio and all of that good stuff. And perhaps that's why back then, like I was so big on like, why isn't it deeper? But like perhaps there's a beauty in it not being deeper. Like sometimes we just need to take a moment and like not be that deep. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so I think there's a therapeutic aspect to that that maybe I didn't appreciate as much back then. And thinking about it and talking about it right now, yeah, I think I'm having this realization right now, like in real
That's
time.
hot. And we're all about ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I went on a little tangent there, but I had been thinking that when you were talking about that transition. We'll go back to our fast 5. Number 2, is there any, like, affirmation or confidence boosting practice that you start your day with?
Absolutely. So I one thing that I always tell myself, especially when I'm nervous or I'm entering a new room that maybe there might be like CEOs in or like people that I'm not familiar with, I always tell myself, enter the room like you own the house. Period. Like that's just it. Like enter the room like you own the house. Like nobody knows essentially that you're nervous right now. Nobody know like they only know what you present to the world. So if you're presenting yourself as confident and as inquisitive and curious and excited, those are the things that they're going to believe about you. They're not going to believe that like you're this scary girl or whatever you might be feeling in the moment. So just enter the room like you own the place.
I love that. I love, like, the reminder too that it's like, nobody really knows what they're doing. Like, some people
Yeah,
are experts in certain things, but literally nobody has it all together. That's been the biggest learning where it's like and if you enter a room, even with people that are super successful at what they're doing or it's a high stakes thing, just remembering that it's like, everybody in this room has something that is a hot mess in their life,
absolutely.
you
But
know?
to
So,
your
like,
point,
I'm okay.
yeah, exactly. But to your point, I really love that you use the word expert because one like thing that use when I'm interviewing people who I can tell are nervous, I always say, "You're the expert." Like I don't know anything about this,
Yeah.
so you can tell me anything, and I mean I'll fact check it, but like you're the expert, and you're the expert on your own life, most importantly. So like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Nobody's living as you. I love
exactly.
that. Okay, number 3, what goes through your head right before the cameras start rolling?
Honestly, before the cameras start rolling, I feel like it's always something funny. Like I always want to laugh, which is a gift and a curse because I feel like
Yeah.
the laughter is nice, especially in situations where I'm nervous. But then sometimes it's just like, girl, get it together. Like I've had moments where like I could not stop laughing and I didn't know what I was laughing about, but I think it was like maybe
Yeah.
nerves. But then sometimes that same laughter is the thing that makes me feel like, okay, we're ready, we're good, we're
Yeah.
laughing, we're good, we're ready.
I love it. That's just a joy bubbling out of you. It's, like,
Right.
pretty. Okay, number 4, to go a different direction, something we haven't really talked about, but what was the first Airbnb you opened, and, like, how did that come into your mind?
Yeah, so my first and only Airbnb right now is in Austin, Texas, and that came about pretty interestingly. So I had wanted to do like short-term rentals for a long time and just diving into the Airbnb arbitrage space. So I decided to take a course. I'm like a course girl. Like I'm always taking a course on something. So I decided to take a course and I thought to myself, this is doable, but not only doable, but I feel like we learned so much here that there are
Sure.
so many steps you can take out. You know what I mean? There are so many steps that you can take out, and then there are so many steps that maybe should have been mentioned because there are definitely times where I'm like, "Why didn't anybody warn me about this? Like, this is wild." You
Yeah.
know? But that course was incredibly helpful. It made me feel empowered enough to take the leap, and, I actually did the course maybe a few months prior to getting laid off from Rolling Stone, and I kinda had a feeling I was gonna get laid off just because of the direction that the show was moving in, and my manager seemed a little unsure about things, and I've been laid off before, so I kind of can see the signs when it's coming, and so I was like, "Well, maybe this is a chance for me to do more of the things that I've wanted to do, but didn't have time to do, like stepping into full-time content creation and working with brands or like doing my Airbnb." And so I learned everything I could, and thankfully I got like a really nice severance pay, and so I was like, let me invest in this. Like, let me just see. Again, it's one of those things where it's like sink or swim. We're not going to sink. We're just going to figure it out. And I kind of did a bunch of like market research and all that stuff because it can be a little tough. Like people kept being like, why don't you do it in New York? Why don't you do it? And I'm like, honestly, the city ordinances in a lot of these
Yeah.
places are nuts. I'm going to do it somewhere where I'm familiar, but also I don't have to jump through a thousand hoops or like hide things and do weird things. Like I don't want to do that, you know? And so
Totally.
I landed on Austin, and it was honestly a blessing in disguise. Because initially I was like, well, I have friends in San Antonio, so if anything ever happens, I can maybe hit up some friends. But then, and in my first few weeks, I had the biggest challenge finding like cleaners and help and all that stuff. And I remember a friend being like, well, you know, my sister lives in Austin, and I had actually met her sister I think like a year prior because my friend and I did like a partnership with the hotel in Austin and we brought her along for like in a restaurant. We brought her along to one of the restaurants. And so I'm like, oh my God, I remember her and I loved her. Like she was great. So if she's down to like help, you know, and she's in college. She's in college, but she's also working. And so I kind of reached out to her and she was like super excited about it. And for me, I'm also like, I feel really good putting money in a college student's pocket too, because I know how it is to be a college student and
Mhm.
like you know, needing things or wanting things that maybe you can't necessarily afford or what or just having the extra money is always nice. So I'm
Sure.
like, this is somebody I trust, this is somebody I know, this is somebody I like, and I'd rather pay you than a random stranger who I don't trust or know, you know?
Yeah.
And so we kind of got that together and that has been the biggest freaking blessing. And I remember there were times where I initially was doubting, like, why did I choose Austin? It's so far for me and all this stuff. But like the puzzle pieces start to come together and you're like, wow, okay, God, I see what you're doing. Okay. You know?
Yeah.
So
Well, in even listening to that, one thing that popped into my mind, you talk about like your transitions and different things. Like, you kind of just breeze through like, oh, and I was like laid off and then this happened. And I was like, okay, like I'll use this severance package to like, invest in this cool thing. Like maybe this is it. You're so positive through these transitions. And I think that that's so powerful, especially for young women to hear, because I think that we can put weight on certain things where it's like, well, what if I were to get laid off from a job, or like what happens, if something I'm doing like doesn't work out the way, and it can seem really big in our heads when we're trying
right.
to start something to the extent that it could even stop us from trying that
Yes.
thing, right?
Yes.
But to hear your joy through everything has made you, I really, we've only been talking for, maybe 40 minutes, but I feel like your ability to pursue things with joy really leads to powerful and positive transitions
Thank
through
you.
anything that you want to accomplish. So I love hearing that and pointing it out.
Yeah, it's like a what if it works out though? You know, like
Right,
it's almost you
exactly.
always
Like,
just
what
have
if
to
I
find that.
fly?
Exactly, exactly. And I do think that there is something beautiful about being human too. And I feel like in my
Mhm.
30s, I'm really tapping into that because for a long time, like I come from a really strong African family, and I remember growing up, my dad would be like, "We're strong. You don't cry," you know. And in my 30s, I've really been tapping into like, no, I do cry. I do cry. But you know
Right?
what I
And
don't
actually,
do?
like, being able to cry is
Right.
strong. Like, oh,
Exactly, exactly. But what I do is even in those, times when I am not the most positive and I am really feeling it, or I'm doubting myself, or I'm nervous, or I don't know what the next thing is gonna look like, I'm like, "Okay, you're gonna experience that and you're gonna feel that, but you're not gonna stay there. So you're gonna give yourself 24 hours to cry about it or to feel
yep,
however, whatever, but after that, you gotta keep going, like, you just have to."
amen.
Yeah.
I love it. Number 5 is, what are you most excited about for yourself coming up?
Ooh, I think I'm most excited about the unknown. There are a lot of moving parts in regards to a lot of things. Honestly, I was talking to a friend the other day about like maybe doing an Airbnb in Phoenix. And then there are always like random opportunities that have popped up for me in the journalism space, but also in the content creation space and working with brands. And so I'm just excited about like the things I don't know yet. I'm preparing myself for a really big 2024. And just like new opportunities, hoping to like host things, hoping to network, hoping to serve more, and be in spaces where I can like give back to generations that are coming up. Just because I just feel like that's just so important, and that is what legacy is all about for me. Just what am I leaving behind when I'm gone? So
I love it. Well, on that note, we always end our show with a question. What was one thing that you had, a trait, a quality that you had as a young person that maybe at the time you didn't really appreciate, but looking back, you love about yourself now?
yeah, I think just being vocal, honestly, and just being confident enough to speak up. I feel like everything I say comes with a story. I'm sorry. I know that we're trying
I
to wrap
love
up,
it.
but
That's what we're about.
believe it or not, so I've always had a, like, pretty raspy, deep voice, and I wanna say, like, I was made fun of, but, it's weird because I was, but I didn't care enough for it to, like, stop anything. So, like, yeah, I was made fun of it for it, and I remember I think I was in, like I don't remember what grade, but this was, like, primary school. My mom taking me to a doctor and being like, "I don't know if, like, something's wrong with her voice, like, can you do tests?" And I remember them putting, like, a camera down my throat, like, just trying to see, like, why does this little girl have such like a big voice? Like she would always be like, it's
Yeah,
a big voice. And the doctor was like, no, she's fine. Like everything's good, you know?
I love it.
And so I think just like using my voice, being confident enough to use it and being confident in its raspiness and its loudness, there's a lot of power in that. And there's a lot of like change and difference and impact that you can make with this kind of voice. I always say my voice is my moneymaker. So at this
Yeah,
point,
girl.
so
Well, we always tell our girls it's like the thing that makes you different when you're young
yes.
is almost always the thing that can bring you massive success as you
Yes.
grow if you can continue to take care of it and let it shine. So, on that note, Charlie, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us today. Where can people find you, follow you, and support what you're doing?
Yeah, so on all platforms, I'm Charlie Cooper TV. So on Instagram, TikTok, on YouTube, Charlie Cooper TV. And yeah, I have a travel blog, tripsanddip.com. It's a bunch of things happening,
Love
but
it.
Charlie Cooper TV is where you can find me.
Awesome. All right, Charlie. Well, thank you so much. We will hopefully talk to you again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate you.